this opportunity to come and speak to us. Now, I'm very thankful to all right, for recommending you to us, and we are so grateful for you. And we look forward to hearing for what you will be saying to us today. Thank you for coming along, and I hope that we will have at the end a question time that can ask Bill about Armenia and so on, all the things. For less, and I have no more to say, so I will hand it over to you. Do you want to take that or just for that? We'll just leave that now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Great. Paul, thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted to be here. First of all, a little bit by way of introduction. I currently am the Financial Services Ombudsman in Ireland. You'll probably be hearing more about me next week. We're doing a report in which we are going to name the banks and insurance companies that have the most complaints. But today, we're not going to talk about that. We're going to talk about Armenia. And first of all, can I say, I do a lot of public speaking, but I have a great advantage when I speak most of the time, is that I know a lot more about my subject than the audience. But this, of course, is a great exception. And you're all the experts about Armenia. I've been there twice. But rather than simply say, I don't know, or it's too early to tell, I thought I'd just give you my impressions of the country. But I'm freely, I don't mind if someone says, Bill, you're completely wrong. You've only been there twice, you know what you're talking about. But that's fine. But I thought I would just give you my impressions and a little bit of introduction. I'm not Irish. I'm a native of Los Angeles, which, of course, we refer to as the western province of Armenia. In my first speech in Yerevan, when I introduce myself, I say I'm from Los Angeles, and I've noticed two differences between Los Angeles and Yerevan. The first in Los Angeles is we have more Armenians. But the second is that in Yerevan, the Karabats is better. So we don't like that very much. Now, the other thing, I'm not Irish, I'm Czech by ancestry, and one of my great hobbies is visiting the Czech Republic. I'm the president of the Irish Czech Society. My first visit to Czechoslovakia was in 1985. I visited again in 1986 with my mother. Every year I try to go 2 or 3 times a year. So when I visited Armenia, I think just to tell you the lens through which I was looking at Armenia was someone from Los Angeles who knew a fair amount about Armenian history and Armenian culture, but also someone who had spent a lot of time in a transitional country, making the transition from the Soviet bloc to the Western bloc. So I brought that lens with me. Now, in my current role, there are some bad parts of the job. You have to deal with complaints from everyone, but there are good parts as well. And one of the best parts of my job is that twice I was invited to Armenia by the financial ombudsman there. And I was visited there twice, both times in October 2012 and in 2013. And I basically was invited to speak at their annual conference. Now, their annual conference is sponsored by the World Bank. And that's why they were able to invite speakers from really all around the world. They had speakers there from the UK, France, Canada, New Zealand, South Africa, India, as well as Russia and Kazakhstan. And what really came through to me at the conference was that the World Bank was very strong on promoting the Armenian Financial Ombudsman, in that they saw that office as really a model for the region. That this would be a regional conference, financial people from really all throughout the region, from Georgia, from Russia, from other neighboring countries. And so now I've been reading on the internet more about the political economy of Armenia, and I know there are lots of difficulties, but my impression is that there are some areas, at least, where there is significant progress being made. So I simply throw that out to you. Now, just to outline my own trips, on the first trip, the first impression that hits you when you arrive in Yerevan is, first of all, you have to get through the airport, which was very difficult, particularly when you had to get a visa. So that took a couple of hours. And then there was the marvelous taxi ride from the airport to the hotel, where you pass by all of the casinos and strip clubs coming in. It is not the best introduction to life in Armenia, and that part of it was quite disappointing. On the first trip, I stayed in the Metropole Hotel, which many of you may know. It's just across from the brandy factory. Is that right? And the one thing, I mean, the hotel was perfectly fine. It wasn't luxurious. It's obviously an old hotel. But in the basement, they had a swimming pool, which was kind of odd because it was 3 feet deep. I'm not sure what you could really do in the pool. But I thought I would go there, and I went there, and you know, the hours were open from like 8 a.m. until 8 p.m. I went down there. Of course, everything was dark. So I had to go upstairs to the reception and say, could you turn the lights on? So they not only did they turn the lights on, but there was a little old lady who sat there and watched me paddle around the pool. So I'm not quite sure what that was all about. I was a little uncomfortable, and I went back up to my room. Just before talking about the actual conference itself, again, I was treated to some rather extraordinary Armenian hospitality. We had one trip going to Noravan, one of the many monasteries, I'm sure you've all been there, which is really quite extraordinary. And they took us to lunch at a restaurant which was just a few miles before you got there, in a cave in the side of the road. You've been there. And absolutely beautiful, really a magical setting. The first thing that happens, you get off the bus and you go not to the restaurant, but the other side of the road is the kitchen, where there are 3 women making the lavash in the ground. There's one woman who prepares the dough, the other who rolls it out, and the most important job is to put the dough on a pillow, and then you do that and you bake it. And then they, of course, served us there, the lavash with the cheese and the coriander, and that really is beautiful. And we had a lovely meal there. The other thing I'll remember about that trip is that with my Canadian and New Zealand colleagues, it wasn't my choice, but on the first day, we spent about 8 hours in the Vernissage. Now, that's not my idea of shopping, is you go there, you buy something, and you leave. But there were 2 other women there who just were fascinated by everything that they saw. And there was one thing, they apparently were some old ammunition canisters, which they had made into coffee grinders. And the Canadian thought this was the greatest thing she ever saw in her life. And so we spent a long time there. Now, what I was able to do, I have 3 children. I have 2 sons and a daughter. My eldest son, like me, he has a rather bizarre sense of humor, so he likes to collect currencies from corrupt countries. So I was able to buy him like a 1 million whatever note with a picture of Saddam Hussein on it. Oh, okay. And the local vendor, with a twinkle in his eye, as he gave me the note, he goes, "Very good, man. Very good, man." I thought that was pretty good. My second trip, this time, this was just in October of last year, they put us in the Marriott Hotel, which is where the conference was on both occasions. And the trips that they gave us there was to the Gerhard Monastery and to Garni, and both beautiful, beautiful settings. At Garni, they took us to a restaurant that's just about 100 or 200 meters away that overlooks the gorge. And that is really one of the most magical settings. That
in a garden. Yes, some of this garden, private garden.
Yes, that's right. It looks like...
I think it's Zurich's restaurant.
Yeah. I'm happy to be corrected at any point. Then now on this second trip, besides going to the conference, I was invited, one member of the staff of the local ombudsman was getting married, and she invited me to the wedding, and I'll tell you about that in a moment. But then I had one private trip. I just had one day, and on the recommendation of one of the members of staff, I got a private car to take me up to Lari, where I stayed in the Tufekkian, the Avan Zaragat Hotel, which was absolutely beautiful. Really a beautiful setting, the restaurant, the people were extremely nice. I arrived there, and within 10 minutes, they produced someone to take me on a drive where I visited Hapat, Sanahin, and Odzun. Really a first-class operation.
And then, of course, I was invited on the Saturday to the wedding. The wedding was in the Mugni St. Gelord Church. Does that ring a bell? Just outside of Yerevan? Mugni. Does that ring a bell? And then the reception was at the restaurant Bellagio. Do you know?
That's it.
And it was an extraordinary reception. There were over 200 guests there. The financial ombudsman was there. Her husband is the Minister for Finance. So I think Armenia, in a way, is like Ireland. It's a small country. All the important people are related to each other. Now, so the financial ombudsman and her husband were the godparents to the wedding, which is something that I was not familiar with, the tradition of godparents to the wedding. The wedding itself was in a very beautiful church, a very moving ceremony. The reception was one of the most lavish receptions I have ever been in. As is typical when you're dining in a grand style in Armenia, you arrive and the table is covered with food. And every 6 places there was a bottle of vodka and a bottle of brandy. And there were constant toasts, which were throughout the entire evening, and it really was quite extraordinary. There was a band there, a Ukrainian band, who were dressed, the men were dressed all in white suits. And the lead singer was an attractive woman in a sort of silver sequin dress. So it was really sort of like Las Vegas. And at the end of the reception, an Armenian singer, who I think is quite well known by the name of Forsh. Forsh, do you know him? He came. And I think he's been around for a long time, isn't that right? So he's quite older now. But he arrived, and he's like the coolest guy you'll ever meet. He was dressed impeccably, and when he was singing, he was like, he knew all the tricks. He was like Frank Sinatra there. So I was very much impressed by that. Just before I go on to the more serious parts, I was treated very well when I was in Yerevan. I feel like I'm an expert on the restaurants there. My favorite is the restaurant Dol Mama, which I understand was the favorite, is it of the ex-president or the ex-president's son? Beautiful food. One night we were taken to Jan's Club. Jan's Club, it's a sort of a jazz club. I put down in my notes, it's where Yerevan meets Las Vegas. Because there's a restaurant sort of on the ground floor, and during the meal there was sort of there was a singer and a man on the piano. Then after dinner, we all went downstairs to like this enormous music venue where there was this band. I think she was sort of the Armenian equivalent of Linda Martin with her full sort of rock band. And we sat on the balcony where in front of us was just an endless supply of fresh fruit and, of course, brandy and whatever else you wanted to eat. So I was obviously having a very good time. I think I will be invited to Armenia again this year, but this year I'm going to do what I wanted to do last year, is when I go there, I'm going to go there about at least 4 or 5 days early and take a tour of Nagorno-Karabakh. So I think that would be very interesting. My overall impressions of the country, and again, I very much see it through the lens of someone who had spent a lot of time in Czechoslovakia, before, the transition. It's obviously very much a sort of what I would describe as sort of Soviet-style country. No matter where you're traveling, you see the ubiquitous, apartment blocks where everybody was living. But what really strikes you about Armenia, obviously, is the very ancient Christian heritage, and seeing all the churches, all the monasteries. And that is something which is very moving. Particularly as you go up north, you see the different landscape, the valleys and the hills and the more mountainous regions. But for me, what really moved me most about Armenia were the people. And the people who I met there, particularly the counterparts to my office, who are my hosts, were the most, they were the most generous, and really just the most good-natured and the most fun people that I've been around. The office there is quite small. There's only about 14 people. And last year, I think they had 12 women and 2 men. In a typical Armenian style, of the 12 women, there were 6 women who were extremely good looking. And the other 6 were like supermodels. Now, the head of the office is a woman. Like, if I was the head of that office, people would think I just hired them on the basis of their looks alone. But she assured me no, it was the basis of their ability. But the other point about the people in the office is that they're all extremely well educated. 2 members of staff had done advanced degrees in the United States. The level of English is extremely high. And I really got the feeling, visiting people in my counterpart, that they were a very effective office. My impression, see, I didn't have any other exposure to other parts of the public service. But even just from what I picked up from people there, it can be very obviously very bureaucratic, very hierarchical, very sort of authoritarian in structure. But this office was very collegial and had a very good atmosphere, a very good environment. And is very well respected, not only in the country, but also, I think, in the region. But even they gave me one anecdote which sticked in my mind. You see, what they do is they adjudicate claims against financial institutions, the same way we do. And occasionally they will uphold a complaint so that someone can get some compensation. And they say when that happens, what frequently is the case, the complainant will come to the office afterwards and will attempt to pay them, because this is the way that they have come to expect things are. But they assured me that no, they're simply politely told, no, you don't pay us, we're just doing our job. So I did get the sense that they're doing things, I think, in the proper way there. Now, Paul asked me would I also maybe say some words about the Armenian economy overall.
Use this one in case.
Well, maybe, could you just go, if I just give you the sign.
No, if you are to indicate.
Oh, no, I can just, I'll just do it directly here. Just to say that, now first of all, I'm not an expert on the Armenian economic policy, but I have read a few things. And I know that, I mean, for me, the lens that I would look at it is really a country that is in transition. And the challenges that Armenia faces as a country are very considerable. And I just put a few here. You have the whole legacy issues that all the former Soviet countries face. They have a legacy of central planning, state control, the rule of law perhaps is not as embedded as it should be. There are issues of corruption. There's also, from what I read, a huge concentration of sort of economic resources in the hands of relatively few people. Infrastructure deficits, the roads. When I was driven from Yerevan up to Lori. We went up to Lake Savan, and then outside of Lake Savan, you go into this tunnel that goes on for about 1 kilometer, does it? So it was a considerable achievement to build a tunnel for about 1 kilometer, but the road was a dirt road. And so it really struck me from my brief experience that you had infrastructure deficits. The real problem, of course, is the poor international connectivity. The fact that there's closed border with both Turkey and Azerbaijan obviously complicates things. The regional instability and even events in Ukraine, things are only getting worse. And the particular challenges that they faced is to try to reform in the context of the global financial crisis has again been quite difficult for them. But there are a number of major initiatives that they're taking place that I think will at least correct some of the problems on the infrastructure side. There's this new north-south highway which they're developing, which I saw that they're making a great deal of progress to. Unfortunately, none of my friends in Yerevan seemed to quite know when this was going to be completed. So that may tell you something about it. They're planning a new rail link to Iran, plans to extend the metro to airport, in some regards, it's like talking about CIE in Ireland. They have a lot of plans, but sometimes they aren't doing anything. But again, obviously, the great challenge for the country is going to be its sort of international isolation, and that's going to remain going forward. Now, one of the big events in sort of Armenia, as sort of Armenia Inc., is that last year they did float the first foreign currency denominated bond. Now, you'll be pleased to know that in the capital markets, it's referred to as the Kim Kardashian bond. But don't worry about that. Apparently, the Japanese bonds are called the samurai bonds, and the Spanish bonds are called the matador bonds. But the Kim Kardashian bond does give them a certain currency, I suppose. Okay. So this was issued just last year, and can I say, all the information I have up here comes directly from the Ministry of Finance. Okay, there was actually an investment conference in Armenia this month, and so I was able to get a lot of information off of that. So they launched a 700 million euro bond toward the end of last year, and this is obviously was marketed to overseas investors. Of course, you couldn't have an Armenian bond without, of course, being in Los Angeles. And the launch of it was successful. It was oversubscribed by 4 times. And so, at least at some level, the international investors, and these are private investors, had the confidence that their money was going to be paid back. And so that is a positive sign. Now, I think particularly in Ireland, all of us know that just because you can raise money doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be successful economically. However, I do think a good argument can be made that in the Armenian context, this is a positive development. Primarily because one of the, well, apparently the largest use of this bond is going to be to retire Russian debt. And it's very important for the country to diversify its sources of funding. So if you said international connectivity is an important goal of the country, well, to have international investors, to be able to access the international markets, I think certainly puts it on a more stable framework going forward. And since the money is held by international investors, they will, of course, closely monitor the country. If they see that, that the economic reforms are not taking place, they could perhaps put pressure on the government. So again, I don't want to oversell it, but I do think it is a positive step forward to not simply be reliant on Russian debt, and it does contribute to financial policy transparency. Okay? And just a few slides there, that the take-up was the biggest part in the US, in the UK, and then in the rest of the world. And I think there's the last slide, which I think completes this. It's mostly by private asset managers, and the last slide then tells another important story. If you look at the price of the bond, it was originally launched, well, I think it was, it's hard to read it here, but it was originally launched at sort of over 6 or 6.5%. It's now gone under 5%, which indicates this is how it's traded. So again, since it's publicly traded by private managers, the argument is that this is a vote of confidence in the country going forward. Now, look, I know a little bit about the challenges of transitional countries. The real problems that Armenia faces are the lack of international connectivity and the fact that many of their public institutions are not conducive to wealth creation. And these are challenges that are going to remain. From what I have seen in my own small world, parts of the country are working relatively well, but again, there are many challenges that are coming forward. And finally, in conclusion, just to say, my abiding impression of the country are the people. I'm madly in love with the people. I'm looking forward to going back again. I think the country has a lot of challenges, but I mean, the people are the most important thing. And it's almost like what people said about Ireland, the young, educated workforce. And I certainly have seen a very important part of that. So I'm looking forward to going back, and I want to thank Paul for inviting me here because it gives me a chance to sort of relive my own Armenian experience and look forward to my next trip. So thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, Bill. This is really quite interesting. I hope so we will be able to, if you have any questions that you would like to talk to or to ask Bill, or from the economic point of view, or from infrastructure point of view, or even from, is that you're right, in aspects of it, please do so.
I'd be grateful if people can correct me for the mistakes I made, I'm sure, but that's fine.
Interesting.
A quick question, Bill, on the bond issue. I saw the composition of investors. It's about 80% fund managers, about 10% banks.
Yeah.
So my question is, what are the what ratings have these bonds got? Have they yet to achieve the AAA?
No. I think they're sort of, they're like double B or something. So they've got somewhere to go. But as I understand it, they're quite well considered from a sort of regional perspective. The World Bank, they rate the countries in different categories. And what they put Armenia in is in a transitional space from efficiency-driven to innovation. So I think compared to other countries in the region, would not be seen as having as promising prospects. But no, they're nowhere near sort of traditional investment grade. Stephen?
When you say region, which are those countries? In the
Well, I
region?
mean, Georgia, Azerbaijan. Yeah, within that region, yeah. They're seen as sort of, I think, leaders within that sector.
Not the Black Sea region.
Well,
Not the
just what I've read focuses just on the more immediate region.
Presumably Azerbaijan representatives wouldn't have been there at the conference, yeah?
Which ones?
Azerbaijan.
No.
It's not.
Just technical probably question about this slide here. As I see, there is a tendency of dropping the prices of euro bonds in this slide.
Interest, right?
Yeah.
Does it mean it is good or?
Yeah, no, absolutely, because investors are willing to buy it at a lower rate of interest. So it's a reflection of the risk of the bond not being repaid.
So this is interest.
That's correct. Yeah. So it's a reflection that people are willing to buy it at a lower rate of interest.
Bill, I just want to ask, I know that Armenians will immediately buy. Will it be only Armenians, or will it be institutions?
Oh, these are institutional, these,
Right.
no, I mean,
It is.
absolutely.
Well, that's a good sign, I would say, right?
No, and the bond issuance, it was oversubscribed 4 times, indicating that there was a lot of demand for this type of a product.
No.
Well, we don't have to,
No.
you can ask me questions about the restaurants in Yerevan.
That's another one, yeah.
I think the restaurants are.
Because it's a bad cross between Europe and East.
Yes, sir.
There recently was a lot of political activity, about does Armenia need to join to custom union or
Yes.
European trade union? The choice made against it. Do you think it's a wise choice? Or
Well, okay, this is really outside of my expertise. I know at the end of last year, they were making a move to join the customs union. And I was just actually listening to an interview by the regional chief of the IMF who was asked the question. And obviously they would not be so enthusiastic about it, but couldn't really say that. I mean, look, these are the difficult choices that Armenia faces, because obviously Russia is their largest trading partner. It is the location of by far the largest sector of the Armenian diaspora. What they need to do is try to maintain their relations with Russia while at the same time opening up to the rest of the world. And the question is, does the customs union, where are the costs and where are the benefits from it? And it's quite a complicated question, but you can easily see why the government felt it was something that they had to do. But I mean, it's a very important question, and it's obviously outside of my expertise. I'm sure some of you would have views on it.
Bill, there's one thing, which is you have connection with the Ombudsman in Armenia.
Yes.
Do you invite like young economists and so on to come and have experience and see?
Well, between my 2 visits to Armenia, 3 members of staff, well, I didn't really invite them, they sort of invited themselves to come. That's right. And we had a very good time with them. I thought on their first day that they're here, I said, what are we going to do with them? So I took them to a very good fish restaurant. And actually Jack, who did a great favor and helped us to entertain them. And one of them had oysters for the first time. So, and no, they had a very good time here. But, and obviously lots of my staff would go there and would want to go there for visits, but I've decided that all the trips to Armenia will be mine.
Can I advise you, next time you go, try and shake off some of your high-level friends and get somebody to take you out to some of the villages and just see what it's like and feel what it's like.
Yeah.
Because it's very interesting, it's very salutary as well, but it's good.
Well, I'm looking forward to taking a trip to Nagorno-Karabakh. That'll be less highfalutin, I suppose.
I would like to ask you, you said about the Ombudsman office and how it's working, and you said it's very effective and model for the region. And I'm really wondering, what is the level of public awareness that something like that exists? You know, sometimes, what is the information on the ground, level?
Okay, well,
if you have any indications.
yeah, well, at the conference, they made a number of presentations, and a part of their strategic plan is to publicize the office.
Oh.
And they had, now I'm not sure if they had advertisements on television or maybe things they had put on YouTube, but they were showing us things, and they were working very hard to raise the profile of the office. Now the office, I think, is relatively new. I think it's there for maybe 4 or 5 years. So they've started from a low base. But it seems that the office is getting better known, is my impression.
And I hope there won't be any conflict between the Minister of Finance and his wife
Well, I hope
later
so.
on, you know. I hope so.
I think we need to inform Hetek what we did, Danny. So that's that.
Since I don't really know about financial ombudsman, really role in society, how will, say, what is the importance of being, having strong financial ombudsman office in the country?
Well, what it's supposed to do is to build confidence in the sector. I mean, and you want people to put their money into productive capacity, to invest, to save. And if people don't have confidence in the sector, then they're not going to do that. So that really is the net social benefit, is that people will save, they will invest, and that can be used to grow and develop the country.
So it's not quite irrelevant for Armenians.
Yeah. But no, I mean, for example, it's a different, I was giving, the Armenians, when you go there, they make you work. I think I've given about 10 different speeches over 2 conferences. And one question that I was asked was kind of funny. It said, how do you deal with complaints about gold? And I said, sorry, this is Ireland. No one has gold in Ireland. But apparently lots of people, but this is their form of saving, isn't it? And see, that's the problem, If you don't have confidence in the banks, well, then you're going to buy gold and put it under your pillow. And that's not the most productive way. Sorry, Jack, to speak against gold.
But is it also that is because the culture, or they like gold to feel it, and where then the banks and the financial institutions would, as you said, if they have the confidence in them, then they will save, invest, and so on and so forth.
There are just so many bad experience. When the collapse of Soviet Union, before that, only people who had gold survived. And it's not unique Armenian experience, everywhere it's the same. Except probably Switzerland.
Yeah, the one thing which is in the financial sector is trust. That's right. That really is a trust, I think. Do I trust in the government? Do I trust in the
gold?
Because at the end, you mentioned about the infrastructure. You know, there's very little. I've been in Lori. We went last year to Tbilisi, and that road. In fact, just 2 days later, there was a very, very big accident. Terrible road. Now, so the government has to do priorities and say these are the infrastructure where people can travel to. And if we want tourism to thrive and so on, all that is part of it all.
Absolutely. Well, certainly you see a lot of work on the highway in the areas outside of Yerevan. You see it being built now, and that's obviously very, very much needed.
But you see lots of square holes dug out of the tarmac, which you sort of dance around, and then that's team number one, but team number two seems to be non-existent or come 6 weeks later to actually fill them in, you know.
That's a small hiccup.
I think you were quite lucky because you are dealing with the financial system behind us. The only things they really did well in Armenia is banks and restaurants. You dealt with these two things, but what about, do you have any idea about any feeling or any industry?
Yeah,
agriculture. I would just that's for example in villages they suffer. These villages they suffer because there is no money investment in there, and we have some places we have very good soil, but because of lack of seeds and money and all technique, everything is collapsing. Everybody is leaving to Russia because villages is getting empty. That is. I said, you were quite lucky. You dealt with those ones. Any feeling that?
Well, no, that's outside my experience.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, I've read things and I can understand that. Lots of the pre-existing industry was sort of, heavy industry, which in the new economy is, less relevant. So they have to make that transition, and that's a very difficult road to make. Certainly, and with the infrastructure deficits, that makes it even more difficult. So I can see that.
I would say there is a lack of sustainability, but human resources are there. It's my opinion, probably, what I see is that the new generation of Armenians is very well educated, emerging, and it's there. It's just lack of infrastructure, which is, a problem, and nothing is sustainable. This is another problem.
Is that because, as Armenians, we don't complain, we don't stand up and say that is wrong? I don't know. I'm a person which I like to see, for example, as you mentioned about your impression when you come from Zvartnots, that was terrible. I really don't. I like to go somewhere longer route just to see that. I feel that is a very, very bad impression of Armenia. In fact, if it's impression anything, is I feel the government. How they gave them, how they, these are the things where clearly
almost
So, but it was even worse, it was in the year now they
I read that, yes.
And this is why I was you. What is the
There are so much potential. No, that's right.
Why, you know, what is the level of consciousness, you know, can we complain, can we bring issues to financial balance between these things? Because we don't do that.
But obviously things happen like this, right? All these casinos around Armenia, it's like all these buildings previously was the furniture shops, the furniture, small furniture, homemade factories. But what happens like government make a rule say in 1 month you have to move everything outside of the city. Incidents happens in the center of the city where someone was very upset, with some crime opportunity, killed 2 people, and said, okay, in 1 month you have to move everything outside of the city. And like for such a big business, doing this non-mass business nearly impossible. That place was the cheapest possible location for them, not very far from the city. So what they did, they come to these furniture shops and offer them money because business was put in a very unsustainable situation. So that's why we see what we have now, right? So it was a choice between moving them out, doing it quickly. So it was just happened like this. In 1 month, everyone is up. So we have what we have for the moment, right? So to change something like this, obviously, it will require more restrictions, even business will suffer more. So there is a choice.
Since you know much more than
About casinos.
Bill allows, I have a question.
Of course.
Are there enough outlets? Are there enough clients for so many gambling institutions? One wonders, they're empty. You don't see cars outside. Now then you see an SUV outside one of them. But mostly they're just liking their life.
Strangely enough, there are a lot. They have enough clients to be very profitable in a few parts. Like I have a couple of my friends who are working there as a member of staff. They are quite profitable institutions, and once they're not profitable, already gone out of business to very quickly, so they will consume by the more successful. Like most people operating transport from, which will bring you from a city center as a taxi to the place, they will take you out if you not have no money straight to your home. it's an excellent business model, but everything done so consumers, like customers, will very happy by gambling, but it is quite successful. So like
should be put in place in Ireland from the pubs to home,
But so like business, bad business,
They
like
have
this.
that in England.
This is dual, like this sites operating 24/7.
Take
They're running, gambling in the night, and they have a furniture shop in afternoon, right? You still can buy furniture there. Like still you can buy chair, table, couches. And like evening size it became like gambling. So yeah.
Well, now the question I would like to ask you: have you been to the south of Armenia, to Sisian and?
No. The only trips I had, I had the 2 trips with my group, one to Norvak and the other to Garni and Gekart, and on my own I just went to the north.
No, right.
But I'm dedicated. The next trip I will go to the Garni.
Okay, we'll see.
But there are many other places I'm sure I'd like to see as well.
Any other?
There on the way, you can go to Zangezur, there's some nice places there as well. It's just on the way.
All right, yeah.
But it's very careful because it's all contaminated with
Heavy.
heavy metals.
Okay, I'll stay away from the heavy metal.
And that is investment. You mentioned about 700 million investment should be within 7 years or so.
It's repayable, yeah.
Yes. And any control how it's going to be?
That's the question. Well, the real control, I guess, is the market, and the market is having some confidence it's going to be paid back. The idea is that if you have the international investors, the government has to be more transparent and more accountable. But the real measure of success is how well the money is going to be used. And if they simply took the money and then just spent it or put it in their pockets, well then it would be a catastrophe. But if they use it to retire debt, to manage their finances, invest in infrastructure.
That's what's happened before.
Yeah.
I mean, just the way we got quite a lot of investment before, but that all went to pockets of some few people. Now it's now most of those charity organizations now they don't give money; they do it themselves.
Yeah.
They hire or they
Yeah.
just take active part of controlling this money that goes there. And now, is there any guarantee that the 700 million won't be the same future?
Well, is there a guarantee? No. No. But I think that it's a better, since you have an international market, there's more transparency, more accountability this way. But of course, there's no guarantee at all. And we know even from Ireland, you borrow a lot of money. And you know,
It's a small country, so it's just
The slogan when they advertise these bonds, I don't know how to put it. When they launched this, the slogan was that they're going to pay the Russian debt, partly married. Did they do this? Did they pay the Russians 100 million, 1,000 million?
well, I'll have to call up my colleague's husband to find that out. No, I mean, the only thing that I've
This is
read,
700.
yeah, 700 billion. You know, all
700 euro, $1,000 million. Did they give it?
well, all that I know from what I've read is that that was the plan.
Yeah.
That's a total. But did they actually do it? No, I don't know.
Because they got it somehow. Because in the meantime, they gave away 20% of the pipelines that they owned. You know, the Armenians own 20% of the gas pipeline. The rest belong to Gazprom. And now they gave that also. So but this is not the pipelines. So, I don't know, it's very
And
messy.
there's some of the most strategic hydroelectric stations. The only one. So, nobody knows who owns that station.
Which station is it? No, Americans, they sold a very important thing to the Americans.
Yeah.
That's what they say.
But there are two different companies.
Yeah. Any questions?
One question. Just, I would like to know if you compare your office operation, how you do the work here with the office in Yerevan. Are there any similarities? What is the main thing which is limitation for Armenia, for example? Do they have less rights or less requirements?
I think the biggest difference between our office and the Armenian office is the same difference between our office and almost every other office in the world, is that we have a lot more formal power than they do. Our decisions are legally binding, and we have a very high jurisdictional limit. We can award compensation to anyone on an individual complaint up to 250,000 euros. So that makes us a very strong sort of legal body. Most other offices in the entire world, what they do is more by way of sort of mediation. They get the voluntary cooperation of the banks and the insurance companies. But we operate in more of a judicial capacity, and that's the big difference. But in that sense, Armenia is very much the same type of system that they have in France, in Germany, in the Scandinavian countries, and most other places around the world. But I do get the impression that in terms of their approach to decision-making, their dealings with the stakeholders, that they're certainly compare very favorably to all of the other international bodies.
This brings my other question. Like, as a European ombudsman, when you knew that husband of ombudsman is a minister, do you think it's okay, or it is kind of conflict of interest?
Well, to me it struck me as being very Irish. Sure, because in Ireland everybody is related to everybody. I mean, no, I mean, for example, I used to be the aviation regulator. This is 10, 15 years ago. The head of the Irish Aviation Authority back then was the brother of the Minister for Enterprise. But that's just the way it is
Yes,
here.
but in this case, it's more conflict of interest.
No, not really, because, no, I mean, the Ombudsman, I mean, the role of the Ombudsman is a separate role. It's to adjudicate complaints brought by consumers. There's no role in terms of macroeconomic policy, no role in terms of issuing bonds or fiscal policy. You know, so there's...
Yes, yes. Oh, they advertise in the newspaper and they talk to...
But I mean, it's a separate role. But to me, it just struck me that, you know, Armenia is a small country. And so,
And there wasn't any...
As long as she does the job well, it's okay.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Any final question?
So basically, you're more enthusiastic about our future
But then we are.
Well, no, but I can well, if you look at the basic problems, I mean, until the regional stability is sorted out, it's going to be a difficult road forward.
Yeah.
That's right.
But I mean, we always know that.
The last question, though. What is your favorite dish of Armenia?
Well, there are too many. Well, I guess, you know, no, I mean, the simple dish of the lavash with the cheese and the coriander as you get off freshly made. And the dal mama had some wonderful quail, so tender, beautiful. But there are just too many. And of course, the caravans in all of its forms. No, my goal is one day to go there and to be apprenticed for a week to a sort of caravan chef. That would be my idea. Okay, well, thank you very much.
Thanks very much indeed, sir. Well, you're stimulating talk, and I hope we think about it, and we, as a community, we would like to also be active in one way or another. But thank you very much for coming along. I hope we see you again.
Next time you have to organize.